Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be on the situation with what happened with Bubba from Nascar. And I kind of want to tell you a story that kind of makes hopefully sense in terms of explaining my thoughts on this whole news fiasco that happened with Bubba. And I kind of want to sort of tell you this story because I think it really does explain the whole situation. Um, so a few days ago, I couldn't find my car keys. When I get my car keys, I always put them in, a special bowl that we have in the house where we put all our keys. And the only two people that drive in my house are myself and my wife. So I knew that if I couldn't find my car keys in the place that they normally are, that it must be my wife that's responsible. And she's always losing stuff. She's the type of person that always loses things. And, I assumed, hey, it must be her that lost the keys. And why isn't she responsible enough to put the keys back where they belong? And I went to her and I got mad at her. I said, why are you so irresponsible? Where are my keys? Do you know where they are? You're always losing things. And, I got really mad at her, had her looking for it, and, just kept on complaining. And as we're looking for the keys, and, the whole time I'm like, putting her down for, her inability to just be a good person to put the keys back when she's done with them. I, put on my coat to go out, so I could be ready to go out. And as I put my coat on, I realized there's something in one of the pockets. So I reach into the pocket and there, lo and behold, are the car keys. And I realized at that moment that everything that I had said was wrong. That everything, like, even my thoughts about her, that she was always the one responsible for losing things. Well, that probably wasn't really true. My anger towards her was totally unjustified. Um, and I had two options. One, I could own up to my mistake and say, oh, I shouldn't have assumed the worst in you. I shouldn't have assumed that you were a bad person. I shouldn't have assumed that you're the type of person that always loses things. Or I could double down. I could say, hey, it's usually you that you loses things. It's usually you that is kind of the person that causes all the problems. It's usually you that, that's not responsible enough to put the keys back. I could have doubled down and said that. Well, that's kind of the situation that happened with Bubba. Bubba was this driver, the first, maybe not the first, but the only black African, African American or whatever you want to say, driver in NASCAR. And he's barely black, actually. He looks kind of mixed, but that's aside. But the point is, he refers to himself as being the only black man in NASCAR. And he basically saw this rope hanging down from the garage door. And it was shaped like a noose. And it was definitely shaped like a noose. It was a very small little hoop at the end. And he assumed the worst. He said, well, these evil white people, they're always racist. And they basically put these nooses everywhere because they don't like black people exceeding in life. And those evil white people, I'm going to complain, and he, got up and he did a presentation. He was tearful. He said, oh, you evil white people, this kind of thing. And it's like, evil white people are so racist. He did a whole bunch of interviews. He promoted the idea that white people are out to get black people. They just don't want to see black people succeed. They even had a big rally before the Talladega. I'm probably mispronouncing that race. See, this is how well I know NASCAR. It's the biggest race, one of the biggest races. And they all rallied around him and they pushed his car out to the starting line. And they showed all this support against racism. And they even had 15 investigators from the FBI look into this situation. And they immediately saw that, hey, this rope with the noose at the end is really just a pole rope. It was there months before even the thought of him having that garage, and it was used just to pull the door down. And the reason it's in that shape is it's easier to pull the door down that way. So it had nothing to do with racism. So rather than apologizing or saying, "Hey, maybe I misjudged white people," maybe I shouldn't have fueled the flames of racism. No, he didn't apologize. Media didn't apologize. They kept on going with the narrative. Oh, this is why we have all these problems, like all this racism, and they didn't retract the story. They didn't say, "Hey, look, maybe we're making the wrong assumption about white people. Maybe they're not all racist. Maybe they're not all out to get us." And rather than promoting a good, positive story where, maybe we shouldn't look for racism all the time, they continued the narrative. They just don't want to let go. And that's, to me, a very sad thing. I mean, this could have been a real learning thing, just like I learned with the keys. I learned not to make that bad assumption about my wife, maybe to take some responsibility for my own mistakes and, learn and move forward and really work together as a team, because we're a team. If I lose the keys or she loses the keys, we have to work together to find them. It's not, we're partners in this thing. Well, black people and white people, we're both living in this society, and we have to work together as a team. We can't just assume the worst of the other people in our society. We have to kind of work together, and whatever problems that there might be, if even if he said, "Oh, is this really a noose?" He could have reacted that way, and he could have asked somebody. He could have said, "Hey, what is this rope here for?" Rather than assuming the worst, he could have said, "What is this rope for?" And somebody would have said, "Well, it's just it's just to pull down the door." It's just, and he would have been like, "Fine." It would have been totally resolved. But rather than that, he assumed the worst. He assumed the very worst and most evil assumption about everyone around him, that they're evil, they're racist. And that's, to me, a real problem. And we have to, have these people that make these claims come out and apologize. And we have to demand that, because if we don't, the media will move on to the next false story. It's just one false story after another, where they just keep on promoting. And so people forget. They forget that actually the outcome of this was that it wasn't racism. It was just a hoax. Like, I've actually seen cases where they, every single one of the things that they mentioned was debunked, totally debunked. Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman, all these things. It's like all these cases, one after another, are debunked as not being racist. And then later on, much later on, after those stories have long passed, they'll be brought up as examples of racism. And nobody is willing to go back and say, "Hey, look, we looked at these cases, they're all bogus." If you stack enough fake evidence, well, you can create a case. And even though the case is based on a whole bunch of lies, the idea is this, that most people don't have the inkling or the sense to basically go and investigate and look at every single case. And when they hear like a whole bunch of people dogpiling or a whole bunch of negative ideas, they think, "Oh, it must be true. It can't be that all of those would be false." So therefore they think, well, there must be some truth to it. And that's really what the media is taking a stance on this. Well, even though this was not real racism, it must have some racism somehow, and it's one of those things where they just, they don't let it go. And all it does is it sows the seeds of, resentment and disconnect between the different groups within our society. And I don't see that as a positive thing. So what we have to do is we have to call out these things, get them to apologize, get them to say, "Hey, look, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have jumped to that conclusion. It was wrong of me. It was a wrong characterization of a whole group of people." And that is wrong. That is racist, actually, fundamentally. To assume the worst in another group is fundamentally racist. And that's really what we're looking at. This is like a condoned prejudice that the media is promoting, that they're encouraging within the Black community, and I think that it's a real problem. Um, Actually, I had a very similar experience with a good friend of mine. He basically was taught his whole life when he was young um, that white people are out to get him. That white people are the devil, the white devils. He would, his mom would refer to them as. And basically, the white devil is going to keep you from getting a job. The white devil is going to pretend to be your friend, but then really stab you in the back. They're going to do everything they can to destroy you. That's the propaganda that he got as a child. And it really worked. He really was afraid to deal with white people. And it was only later when he started to deal with white people that he realized that white people never acted the way he was expecting them to act. They always tried to help him. They always tried to do things to basically better his life. And so, as I was saying before the phone rang, he basically had this assumption. And when he started to deal with white people, he realized that his assumption was totally wrong. And we met later. Like it was other white people that sort of made him realize that white people are not so evil. We met later. We became good friends. I helped him with his business, and yeah, it's a good friendship. So the problem is when we make these assumptions about other races, and really there's a lot more of that within the Black community. It's a real part of their way of life, actually, that they're taught to really hate white people. And the media doesn't make it any better, is my point. That if they get this confirmation of their feelings, that they're being told, hey, white people are evil, and that there's a real problem with white people, and that they are discriminating against you, that they are trying to do these racist attacks against you, then it only solidifies that idea within them. And that's going to only cause more and more problems. What we have to do is break that cycle. And it's a misjudgment of white America, white Canada, of white people in general, that we are racist, whereas it really isn't the case. It's really just people misunderstanding each other. And the goal is, let's try to understand each other so we can live with each other. I just hope that people will investigate and will kind of understand things, like make the same movement forward that I made with the keys. That I realized, hey, maybe I was wrong, and I apologized and begged for forgiveness, and that's the best way. Like, you gotta not assume the worst in people. And this whole idea that all white people are racist is really assuming the worst in people. And I don't think that all white people are racist. I don't think that all Black people are racist. But making these assumptions will only lead to further division, and that's not not a positive thing for our society. So yeah, this has been Socially Triggered. I hope you enjoyed my story. Actually, it's not a true story. I just wanted to. I would never do that to my wife, but yeah, I just wanted to tell that story, just to give hopeful example of maybe how to better understand this, because I'm sure other people have experienced that. And I just want people to understand that this is not the best way forward. Thank you for watching.